The next kind of control statement that we are going to look at is a switch statement. And the switch statement is a statement that allows us to evaluate the value of some variable or some statement, some expression, and based on that value, do different things for different values. So a good example of a way that we can test this is we can have our print statement print a certain numbers of copies. And based on that number of copies, we are going to print out the model number and then is on or off that many times. So let's go ahead and modify our print statement so that it will take in a number of copies. So we will put int copies here, and this will be the number of copies. And then we can use a switch statement by calling switch. And then what we want to switch on, we want to switch on the number of copies. And then what we will do now is inside of our block here, we are going to provide cases for the different cases that could exist. So case of 0, we can do something here, and for each one of these case statements, we need to provide a way to get out of this, either to return or break, so that we don't fall through. Because a switch statement, what will happen is, if we have case 0 and case 1 here, if our number of copies that comes into 0, it's going to execute the code that we put after this case 0. And then it's going to go right on to case 1. It basically falls through in Java. So this can be useful if you want to utilize this in this switch statement. But if not, we can use this break statement, which we will cover a little bit more in details later when we get into loops. But for now, just know that you will need to put a break statement after each case if you don't want it to fall through. So I have got a case 0 and a case 1 here. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put after this case what I want to happen in the code. So I'm going to do something that's a little bit inefficient here for now, and then we are going to make it more efficient when we get into loops. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to put our code that prints here, but I'm going to put this only for the case of 1. So in the case of 1, then we'll print this statement once, either the on or the off. In the case of 0, we are not going to do anything. So let's go ahead and add another case here. I'm going to add a case of 2. If the copies amount is 2, then we are going to print this twice. And if it's off, we will print this twice again. And again, this is very inefficient what we are doing here, but I just want to demonstrate to you how the case works and then show you how a loop will help to make this code a lot cleaner later on. Right now we are programming without a loop, and that's why this is going to be a little bit messy here. The other thing that you can do with a switch statement is you can have a default case. So if it doesn't match 0 or 1 or 2, then we can choose to use the keyword default. And this is a special case. This default case is going to get hit if it doesn't match any of the cases that are here. So if our copies is passed in as a tree, it's not going to hit 0, it's not going to hit 1, and it's not going to hit 2. It's going to hit the default here. In this case, we are going to print out number of copies is not supported. So if anyone picks a number greater than 2, we are just not going to be able to print that out. We're just going to say that it's not supported. So let's go ahead and run this and see what happens. We will have to go in and we will have to modify our call to print because we have required a parameter now. If you remember, we have added this copies parameter. So let's make a copies of 0 and see what happens. I will run this now. And you can see nothing has happened because what has occurred here is we pass in a 0 here. We switch it on copies, which was 0. And because it was 0, it went to this case 0 and it did nothing. It just broke out of the switch statement. So now let's try print 1 for 1 copy. And as you can see, we get my printer is on because the printer is set to on, and what we can see has happened here is it switched on copies. Copies is 1. We have a case 1. It executed everything here until the break. Then it broke out. Let's go ahead and try print 2. And you can see it's printing, my printer is on twice. And that's because when we went to our switch, the copies was 2, it hit this case, it hit this is on statement, and then it simply printed out twice. And again, this is not very efficient because we are repeating a lot of code, we have a lot of code duplication here, and that's because we don't have the ability to use a loop because we haven't learned about that yet. But once we get to the loop, we are going to be able to clean that up. Now let's give a number that's greater than 2. Let's put 50 here and see what happens. You can see number of copies is not supported because it's hit this default case, and let's see what would happen if we took away one of these break statements. Let's say that you forgot on case 2 to put a break statement here, so let's delete this. Now we will go back and we will make it so that we try to print 2 copies, and we will run this. And you can see it actually hit the statement for 2, but then it went right on and hit the default statement. It fell through. So it's very important to remember to put a break statement or some kind of return, something to stop it. Otherwise it will just fall all the way through. And sometimes the behavior you want, for example, if you wanted to do something, the same thing for, let's say, 1 and 5, we could actually do case 1, case 5 here, and you can see either 1 or 5 is given to execute this code right here. So I will go ahead and switch this to a 5 now. And you can see that it still did what 1 had done before. So a switch statement basically lets you switch based on the value, some value. If you are using Java 7 or 8, you can actually switch on a string. So you could put a string here and not just a number. But if you are using an earlier version of Java, it will have to be an integer to switch on. And you can see here that we could make our numbers go up to any number up here. And we can provide cases for any number of values that we wanted to. And we always have this capability of creating this default case. And we don't need a break here on the default case because there is nothing for it to fall through to.